Welcome back to Night School 2026. Don Juan, Cantos 9, 10, 11, and also 12 because we have to get to the end of the introduction, as it turns out. Back with me, Jesuit educator, Daniel Babcock, and public school teacher, and podcaster, and parent, Wes Chance.
Hey,
Nice to see you,
here.
John.
Good to see
Hello,
you.
good to see you.
Well, so we finally got to the end of the introduction of Don Juan today and these frolicsome rhymes. And we're told that he might intend to do up to 100 cantos. Sounds a little Dantesque in that way, though. It looks like we have 18 in front of us, but perhaps that's just due to editorial decisions. We'll have to find out. But this time around, I guess I had made the claim earlier on that after the first five cantos, given the size of the ones that follow, it sort of looks like we get a postprandial, postcoital dip in the romantic ethos that elongated or long form poetry, as we noted with Keats, would seem to be difficult for an ethos that emphasizes novelty and youth, and therefore perhaps brevity. Um, but now that we're in sort of what we might consider the middle, barring some strange numeracy, like numerical wizardry in the near future, and we've now gone from what Spain to the areas of the Turks to Russia to mannered England, which is where Lord Byron's actually from, and he's quite critical of it.
With no like story of the journey. Just all of a sudden he's in England.
Yeah.
Right, and also really running by his rakish deeds, right? Like
Yeah,
that's been
yes.
like two lines that
Yeah, yeah.
he's
He's become dissipated and
he's
then now
become
all this.
dissipated, right? Exactly,
Yeah, yeah,
precisely.
yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
But was there a languorousness, a soporific nature to these cantos, or does he keep the energy up? And is that hypothesis perhaps losing steam in a way that the poem is not? And if
I
that's a dull
thought these,
question, I'd love to hear what you have to say anyway, or irrespective of it.
I thought that these were some of the best so far. I know, Babcock, you really like the opening of nine, right? And you were talking last time about the openings and how they were worth kind of looking at because he's always doing interesting allusions and playful things in the very beginning of each of the cantos. But I particularly thought like 11 and 12, once we're in England and we're, following this young rake around, but he's also sort of jaded already, right? He's already like kind of too cool for the English and he's not interested in really playing those games anymore. And so it almost looks like it's going to turn into a some kind of Bildungsroman about Layla, right? About the girl. Because they talk about he's got to find a governess for her. He's not going to take care of her himself, or he needs help. And so, yeah, that the the way that we open here with a kind of philosophical digression of I don't know 20, 30 stanzas or so before we kind of get to the story of how we get from Russia to England eventually. Uh, yeah, just it's fascinating. It's kind of mind bending. It's definitely playing with the form. Um, and then 11, I thought 11 and 12 when we're in England, those were just really, really good. Like as poems go, like I was just more engaged in those than I had been in a while. So it's like the beginning, I think.
Yeah, I really enjoy the beginnings. I think the what I'm trying to think about how we phrased the categories of who the speaker is, the narrator is, versus the plot of the poem itself, the epic poem. Um, and regardless of what we wanted to call it, the voice of the speaker is I'm way more interested in his parts when he's just musing about existence or poetry. Or I mean, in Canto 9, it's all about death and existence, and he keeps referencing Hamlet a bunch or Othello. And one thing that I find particularly interesting is the way that he just drops in these lines from Shakespeare in particular that are offhanded lines, and I'm trying. That's what I've been flipping through trying to find it. I know it's in Canto 12 because I was reading this today, and there's just one line where he says, "'Twas strange, 'twas passing strange," and that's Othello talking about when Desdemona fell in love with him in Othello Act 1, Scene 5, I want to say. But he's also on trial. He's defending his love and marriage to Desdemona from accusations of witchcraft. So, anyways, just the way that he is reflecting on his own life existence I'm very much engaged, and I'm not disengaged when Juin comes up. I also enjoy the Juin parts. They're just not epic in any way any longer. Like since he's been with the Sultaness, there's really not really much adventure. I mean, he was in war, but when he's hanging out with Catherine, it's just like he's a dude hanging out with a rich lady and powerful lady who's older than him, and he's dissipated.
And he's just replacing the former.
Yeah, the former favorite.
Well,
Yeah,
so in
yeah.
some ways he's reduced to a type rather than I wonder if he has been at this point reduced. Okay, so I'm going to say this and double assumption here. I wonder if hypothesis he has been reduced to a type so that the voice of the author, the narrator, can come through because the focus is now shifted to the voice of the author rather than in the development of the authorial voice and thought rather than the development of the character and perhaps even the plot. Maybe not the plot, because as Wes said, it is getting pretty interesting, but the character, the protagonist himself, is he is he Bildungsroman? Is he going through a Bildungsroman or the opposite, dissipated, right? And like you said, is the plot, is he still interesting and engaging? Are there necessary foils around him in order for him to be, or is he sort of fading to the background while the genius of this narrator comes forth, which I note, even if we're not new into the work so far, it would still seem consistent with our sort of thesis if the beginnings of each canto were the strongest parts. Um, and like I've just been looking at the beginnings. So what, nine? We have mentioned little linguistic bit talking about fame, Wellington, Villington, a little bit of talking about various nations. Then he moves on, but then 10 we get talk of Isaac Newton and the Apple experiment, very famous. Bishop Berkeley in 11, that's a Recherche reference. George Berkeley is a very famous. He's called, I think, an immaterialist. He believed, and this is something that John Juin seems to get quite right. He believed, unlike materialists now who believe that there is nothing but matter, he took the opposite tack and
Ha.
made the argument that everything is immaterial. Actually, so he's a really interesting cat. I think I only got to read him because I went to a Jesuit. I was in a Jesuit philosophy program for undergraduate, and so I know Bishop Berkeley. And then mention of the barbarous Middle Ages, but nothing more barbarous than man's middle age. And so another sort of perhaps swipe at himself, but also Dante. Um, and he does mention Dante a couple times, not as much as, or not as many times as he does Shakespeare, but that seems natural as well. But so these are all interesting places to start. And
Well, I think I wanted to go back to just so
yeah,
the idea of the epic tradition, but a romantic focus, and I think that the romantic focus is so consumed with the self, and I think that's kind of I think he cannot go away from this reflective of the reflections on what existence is for the individual person, which might track to your point with these beginnings, right? Wellington, Newton, these great men um, of conquest in their fields. Um,
Intellect.
and then Berkeley of intellect, but Berkeley also of like this as you're pointing out, this sense of like the idea that the immaterial being more important. Um, yeah, but I don't sense it as a point. I don't sense it as like his project is to say X. It feels just kind of like it's just an organic outpouring of expression.
Yeah, I think he says pretty much explicitly somewhere that he doesn't plan out what he's going to do, and he's that helps it be exciting for him. That helps it be vibrant, and he continually brings up these other poets, these older poets, who he thinks have missed the missed the boat as far as the romantic movement goes, and the things that they had promised they aren't delivering on. Right? He kind of even mocks Keats, which is
Hmm.
like, geez,
Hmm.
lay off, the guy just died. But
Well,
yeah,
but doesn't
he has no reverence for anybody. Yeah,
doesn't he say Keats was it was the time period that didn't understand him and led him down a path because he was
the
trying to please
criticism. Yeah,
critics?
he said like he
Yeah,
got killed by like one bad review or something.
yeah,
It's like,
yeah.
come on.
Which
But
that's the Chatterton story, right?
still,
Um,
even yeah, even more so, right?
Thomas Chatterton, right? The youth, the
Yeah.
17-year-old who had killed himself in like 1770, 1780, something like this.
So
I don't
like a
remember.
little before them. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And
Go ahead, Wes.
I mean, I just think the structure of this, it does feel like every time he opens, he could basically just do anything. Like there's a sense of sometimes there's a bit of a you know we're left wanting a little more at the end, but each of the cantos does really kind of feel like it just peters out in a way. There's not really cliffhangers. And then when we pick up again, we're not like doing it in medias res at all. We're doing it in this, yeah, very fleet. It's like flying around, free floating, associating, and then eventually we get back to some sort of action. But it may or may not like line up with what I feel like. We first kind of note this with this escape from the Sultan and the Sultana, and it's just like exacerbated with each passing canto. And it's almost like the stuff with Catherine is like that Sultana stuff all over again.
Yes.
But yeah, but he's changed. He's different. He's no longer putting up a fight in the same way. He's inhabiting this new role, right? This role of the favorite. And maybe that's partly to contrast the two cultures or something, but it also seems like there's a real change in him that's taken place here. That yeah, he's changed.
Hmm. That's interesting. Babcock, you mentioned all the Shakespeare references, and even looking at the end of 10, I see him mention Falstaff and Hoary Hal, Prince Hal, and then also,
Mm-hmm.
of course, the song Roland, Roland and Roncesvalles. But doesn't he mention Chaucer quite a bit in this section as well? I think he explicitly goes back to him several times. Especially when he talks about doing his 100 cantos. And we talked about Chaucer last time. The promise was 120 or so total for the 30 total pilgrims who were going to do two uh, on the way there, two on the way back. And we don't get that. And that makes me think, in making the connection with Chaucer, that he may be opening up his that it may be two things. I thought a lot about this because I spent the last 5 days in hotels telling stories with people and receiving stories. And so I thought a lot about Chaucer. Of course, I think I was probably the only one at this conference full of economists thinking about Chaucer.
Hmm.
Probably.
But but in some ways that makes the function of what one is doing to tell a story, a good story. Doesn't have a moral import or a patriotic import. Doesn't even have to hit the form perfectly. So he does keep doing that, and I think his rhymes continue to be funny and impressive. But it also means that he's putting himself in conversation with somebody that didn't finish his grand project. And a lot of people don't hold that against Chaucer because he still put out a pretty sizable bit of poetry.
Right.
But not as much as he promises in the beginning. So no Dante in terms of being able to predestine and then fulfill, but still something really good. But there's a reason why we only have 70 of his manuscripts and we have 700 of Dante's. And so, time has told. And but that really frees him, right? In that if Chaucer, his fellow English poet, long form English poet, more so even than more so than even Shakespeare, and I don't think he wants to mention Milton too much because Milton also sort of nails it, and has a shorter form too, right? 12 cantos, up from 10 to make it like the Aeneid, but his 1668 is those are 10 cantos, then 1674 in the second printing. He gives the prefaces that are the only things that students read, so that they don't even actually read an original part of the poem, and it's split into 12.
Mm.
But it really frees him to kind of go as long as he wants,
Yeah.
because if the Canterbury Tales are another one of his literary fathers, and Chaucer is allowed to be great without finishing, then really, and I think this is sort of romantic, he should follow his muse, as long as it's sort of an excuse for stopping short when one might ought to finish, but also, I think there is a philosophy of art that suggests that when the muse comes, one does art. When the muse goes, one stops doing art, and that there's a sort of naturalism to that. That is not artificial in that way. As a writer, I do not embody that perspective, and also a creator of content. But I do see a romanticism in that perspective, and a certain validity. And I do know writers who, like, have to get sort of like high and drunk to write, and that's when they feel like it flows. Um, Not that one would have to, of course.
Uh, so that's an interesting, captivating argument. The one thing about Canterbury Tales is that they're just good. Like that's it. Like there's nothing, and in a way that this is also it's just entertaining. Like it's just enjoyable to read this. Um, and I think you're right in saying that he nails the form. Like he never misses a meter, he never misses a rhyme, and neither does Chaucer. Like Chaucer, he hits it every time. Um, and it's also fairly easy to follow. Like yes, I don't you it doesn't feel like I know where the plot's gonna go, or like all of a sudden he's in Russia, but I don't ever feel disoriented. Um,
Right.
okay, and then an additional point to support this idea, Alex, is thinking about Shakespeare. Have you guys seen Hamnet?
No,
Yes,
not
indeed.
yet. I've heard it's sort
It's
of like tragedy porn. Um,
no, I don't think so.
okay, okay.
I
Well,
thought
I
it was
accept your view more than the other people I've heard.
I thought it was excellent. I really, really enjoyed it. I mean, it's fan fiction. Like, they depict Anne Hathaway as this pagan witch woman from the woods, and it's entirely possible that she was, but she was probably Christian, maybe even Catholic, etc. Anyways, that's a side point. But in the movie, there are all these little moments where these like phrases that he just comes across in his life, whether he says them or someone says them to him, and they are Shakespearean lines, mainly from the play Hamlet, right? That's part of the sort of idea. Like there's a whole thing where the wife is teaching her children something about plants, and she's getting them to remember certain uses of plants. And one of them is, here's rosemary, that's for remembrance, which is, of course, is from Ophelia's
Ah,
scene. So, anyways, it's an excellent movie, and it's all about parenting, Wes. So you should enjoy it. But it is sad. But I it is sad. But so in terms of tragedy porn, that's a poor description, because it is sad and tragic, but in the best ways that Hamlet itself is sad and tragic, right? It's like a tragedy that fills you up rather than takes away from you, in my mind. But anyways, my point being, the version, so to spoil the movie a little bit, at the end is a production of Hamlet,
ah,
one of the first ones, and it's we don't see the whole thing, of course, because they edit the movie, but it's clear that it's a slightly different version than the canonical Hamlet that we know of in 2026, which of course would make sense because he wrote it and then maybe revised it, and other acting troops over time added parts that he had cut out. And so, like, what we think of now as the canonical Hamlet, probably in Shakespeare's life, never was completely performed in that way, right? It's all just kind of piecemeal put together, which I think is part of what you're saying of the tradition that Byron is coming from, is this sort of casual piecemeal, not technical, not in the small verse sections, but in the grander sense. Um, it's not an organization; it's an organism.
Right.
And so I think that the references to Shakespeare would support that claim about he's a spiritual descendant of Shakespeare and Chaucer, and not these. He doesn't really mention Pope very often. I think Pope is being a little more in that vein of like a little bit more technical, a little more calculating.
Yeah, I do intend to watch more movies. I'm not really good at making time or finding time, but I mean I think there is something to the like the question of inspiration and like experience that as much as I like the thesis like as poet narrator voice ascends, so Juan as character must sort of descend into the background a bit. I think so, and yet they are foils for one another, right? In some way, the poet's voice is the main foil we actually have for Julian. So we don't get much of Layla yet, and maybe she'll become important, but he doesn't seem to have friends, not really,
Mm.
or servants or any, there's not like dialogue in a traditional sense, really. There's internal things, him being compared to the English or being compared to the Russians or this and that, right? But it's mainly it's him and the poet, and that's like we form the third in their kind of dialectic or something like that, right? And what is important to note and know about Byron's life is that he had this awesome crazy life, and so in some way he's processing that through Juin, and it's not like in your face though, right? Like this is not the wild escapades of Don Juan. It is almost like the attempt for him to think through some of that stuff, but through this other lens entirely, right? This creation of his own that
Mm.
he's kind of throwing him into different weird situations that I don't think map onto Byron's exactly in most cases. I don't know. But at any rate, they form this opportunity for him to, yeah, go on these kind of flights of fancy, thinking through the tastes of his audience, his own place in the poetic tradition, and then yeah, we'll see like a little bit of action with Juin, and he'll have some little adventure. He'll shoot some dude on the hill overlooking London, and like that guy who tries to rob him or whatever, and so just making I guess a kind of critique about like how um, law abiding or not, rather the English are, right, and how they're a nation that um, has beauty, but their women's beauty is not like overt or something. He talks about that quite a bit as well. So he's making these commentaries, but they're all sort of veiled. They're all sort of in this interesting, I don't know, this kind of play of light and shadow, this between this hero as he calls him and his own voice. And so like the kinds of things that he gets to do with this form are increasingly interesting, I think, as that goes along here, as he kind of works himself up to the end of his 12 canto prologue. And and it really reminded me a lot. I don't know about the timing here of I don't think he can possibly be after Eugene Onegin, right? The kind of comic yet long poem verse drama thing that Nabokov is so taken with as well. Um, it really feels that way because of how that character too is like this. He's a hero in a certain sense, but his main claim to fame is that he's sort of above all of social convention, right? He's like gone through all the love affairs, all that, and he's come out the other side, and he's like, so what? You know, what is there now? And that's kind of the launching point for that poem. And I feel like we're getting something similar in the the Knights of London social life and this and that, and things 11 and 12.
Yeah, no, so okay, to that point, and maybe further towards the thesis or an expansion of the thesis or against it, I'll be interested to hear what we think about this. Earlier when we were talking about the poem, we were trying to identify sort of a narrative thrust from sort of romantic Edenic locations, in some ways similar to Artis and Ada, towards more constrained, constricted, um, socially yeah, socially imprisoning sorts of environments. And so we went from freedom to slavery to the Russians, or sorry, to the slavery with the Turks, then
Mm.
the Russians, then the extremely restrained Brits. And so maybe if it's not so much the there being a vitiation of the character for the author and sort of a psychoanalytic transfer of unconscious to consciousness or consciousness to unconsciousness, maybe there's a vitiation of the action of the plot due to the socially innervating nature of the the higher prevalence of rules and informal norms
Mm.
and stultifying and sort of killing intangible things that destroy the reality of life insofar as life is defined by experience and emotion and novelty. Um, and so now that we're among the Brits, they seem pretty uptight. And I think that's to some extent how he describes them, even though they try to rob him right when he gets there at Shooter's Hill. And Shooter's Hill is actually the road that was taken on the pilgrimage to Canterbury. And so it's really interesting that they try to rob him there. But could it be the case that the character perhaps seems more vitiated, not because his energies are being drawn simply into the author, but that he's going into places that turn one into a bourgeois individual, into a more typical individual.
Yeah, that yeah, I like that
He's he's
approach
he's
to it
he's
actually.
not in an exotic land any longer. He's in contemporary, familiar. Um, okay, so will he become a precursor to Dorian Gray?
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
mean, like that's a question to ask. Um, do the other thing that is playing along with this is Napoleon is sort of haunting
Yes.
the story, right? We had mentioned like a bunch of reflections on Wellington in Canto 9. Then there's Catherine, also, right? A foe of Napoleon. He's referenced a few times. He he seems to be another sort of spiritual father for this character of Don Juan who doesn't fit into the norm, the bourgeois society. Um, yeah, like it's not he doesn't praise him, but he references him in ways that are, he doesn't say what I'm trying to think of some of those phrases that they call Napoleon, the scourge of Europe and all this kind of, the oh gosh, I'm blanking on there's some of those famous like political cartoons about Napoleon from the era in which they're just like, attacking him as this terrible, terrible individual.
Yeah, I'm just kind of scrolling through. I'm trying to find some of these places that there's one in I don't even know what canto I'm in, sorry, but this stanza is 50 plus, gosh, gotta do math here. 71. Um,
How does it go?
so let's see here. I think he's talking about Catherine. So I guess we're in nine
Nine.
or
Yeah, that must be
10
nine.
still. 971. Yeah, and when you add to this her womanhood in its meridian, her blue eyes are gray. The last, if they have soul, are quite as good or better, as the best examples say Napoleon's. Mary's, Queen of Scotland, should lend to that color a transcendent ray, and Pallas also sanctions the same hue, too wise to look through optics black or blue. And it goes on, her sweet smile, and then her majestic figure, her plumpness. And so it's just a passing reference there, um, but it's interesting. He's comparing Catherine to Napoleon to Mary to Pallas Athene, and yeah, and why? Like Napoleon's eyes, are they dreamy? Like what are we saying exactly?
Yeah. Well, and look at the opening to line to stanza 72. Her sweet, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
73. And that's enough for love is vanity. And that's enough. I don't need to talk about that anymore. So it's this
sure.
it's the plot of the of Juan's affairs are not worth talking about. It makes me think a little bit of what's that story? The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, right? It's like he's living this fantasy of Don Juan as his chance to sort of escape. But the difference is, but Wes, I'm thinking a lot about what you said about this idea where he's using this, the narrator or speaker, Byron himself, is using this story as a way of kind of explaining his own behavior or uh,
Well, look,
putting it,
like Milton
go ahead.
justifies the ways of God to man, and
Yeah,
Byron justifies the ways
the
of
ways of
Byron
man
to.
society.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And then I mean Alex, I think you're spot on in saying that he's that's a good read that he's as he's traveled back into the familiar setting for the reader of the 19th century, the character is not he can't live there. It's like his life force is being sucked out of him, and he becomes more dissipated the closer he gets to society.
I think so sort of to that point, I was mentioning Canto 11 and Canterbury uh references there, but I found some more explicit ones. I was like, I'm sure that they must have been. But if you look in Canto 10, verses 71 to 70, really 75 at least, but maybe I'll just read a couple of them. On with the horses, off to Canterbury. Tramp, tramp over pebble and splash, splash through puddle. Hurrah, how swiftly speeds the post so merry, not like slow Germany, wherein they muddle along the road as if they went to bury their fare, and also paused beside to fuddle with schnapps, sad dogs, whom Spookes und der Flugter affect no more than lightning a conductor. It's funny, I've had schnapps in Germany. I was with people that really insisted on it too. So now there is nothing gives a man such spirits, leavening his blood as cayenne doth a curry. As going at full speed, no matter where its direction, I'm just emphasizing this, as going at full speed, he's in transit right now, right? Like these pilgrims,
Hmm.
where he feels alive. As going at full speed, no matter where its direction be, so 'tis but in a hurry, and merely for the sake of its own merits, for the less cause there is for all this flurry the greater is the pleasure in arriving at the end of travel, which is driving. This sounds a lot like the old ridiculous Joe Sachs translation of the word energeia from Greek, being at work, staying itself. Um, so 73. They saw at Canterbury the cathedral, Black Edward's helm and Becket's bloody stone. Becket, St. Thomas of Becket, is who the Canterbury Tales people were actually going there to see on their pilgrimage. Were pointed out as usual by the bedrel in the same quaint, uninterested tone. There's glory again for you, gentle reader. Oh, there we are, gentle reader. A nice bit of apostrophe there. All ends in a rusty cask and dubious bone, half solved into those sodas and magnesias, which form that bitter draught, the human species. um, Okay, just I guess this is the last verse. The effect or stanza. The effect on Juan was of course sublime. He breathed 1,000 cresses as he saw this cask which never stooped except to time. Even the bold churchman's tomb excited awe. Even the bold churchman's tomb excited awe. It's almost a Dostoevskian point about the living nature of religion. Who died in the then great attempt to climb over kings who now at least must talk of law before they butcher. Little Layla gazed and asked why such a structure had been raised. But even a tomb in a sort of religious site is seen as somewhere with mana and somewhere worth going to. And like I mentioned with Dostoevsky, I think he uses the power of religion differently. But Don Juan here sees religion as an avenue towards experience, or at least the veneration of the pilgrimage and the pilgrimage site as something that is parallel to the romantic journey. And that even if there is sort of a trajectory towards the stillness of the bourgeois typical existence, going out on the pilgrimage is something that makes him spiritually similar to Chaucer. And obviously Chaucer's characters are not particularly holy. The wife of Bath, for example, and again,
Well,
and several other ones of them, like they're going to a pilgrimage site, but they're doing it really to live.
I mean, even those who have taken holy vows are not particularly holy, right? That's part of
Sure.
the whole point.
So
Um,
he's got the plowman. Come on now, he's got the plowman. Plowman's real
the
holy.
parson is the only one that he
Parson,
thinks
yeah, parson.
is good. The rest of the holy men are all
Well, there's
scumbags.
one. At least there's one. Would it take 10 just men, Babcock?
There you
Five
go.
just men? One?
Uh, and I think in Canto 80, is he referencing Dante, the Florentine? So said the Florentine.
Yeah, well, almost certainly. But there
Although he referenced Machiavel in Canto 79. Was Machiavelli
also
There's
also?
also a
Machiavelli.
Florentine. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Galileo. There are several. There are lots of.
yeah,
Yeah, there are a
yeah.
few famous ones. So if it were 79 and Machiavelli, then well, yeah, he is also famously banished Florentine. Um, and
Well, look,
Go ahead.
he actually gets to Canterbury. I just want to say, like, as far
yes,
as like pitting himself against Geoffrey Chaucer, like, look, I got it to
Victor.
Canterbury. It only took me, you know, 300 pages, which is like the entire output that you made in your lifetime. or something. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so what do you gentlemen make of the fact that he and we brought this up in text prior. So and since we're getting to the last quartile or so, I think it needs to be addressed. And I know Babcock, you had a couple things you wanted to address. And what is I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thought doing all that précis. Oh yes. Sorry. Oh, précis actually helped me there. What do you make of this being all a beginning?
Yeah.
I know that we've mentioned, and Wes brought up the line where he says that he really doesn't plan past like the next word or line. It's basically he's just flying by the seat of his pants, as we would say, or vamping. Well,
I
yeah.
Good.
I mean, I just like to some extent, I would say, do you or ask do you buy that, or what does he mean by saying that, or is that itself like a smokescreen for suggesting that he is losing power, but he wants to say, well, no, I could go on for 100 cantos, or is this going to be, or do you trust this? Do you take an optimist view that this is going to be these last six or so cantos are going to really be where the money's at?
Okay. Here's one thing I would say is that um, in my both in lived experience and in my literary reading text, including, broad definition of text.
Or mimetic experience.
Yes, there you go. Yes, my medic experience. Oh, we got a blizzard outside. It's crazy.
We had hail today in Baton
The
Rouge.
That's pretty wild. The In northern Michigan, they had 30 inches of snow, just like an hour, no, 2 hours north of me, where I am right now. Anyways, um, uh, the if the target of a quest is volume of sexual conquest, it is going to be a fruitless, purposeless journey very quickly. Like I can rattle off both, like I said, in real life and in literature, characters who are essentially trying to fill a completely bottomless pit. I mean, it's the passion of lust, right? It's the sin of lust. Um, however, um, I've been thinking kind of while we've been talking about like what would make this a like what where has Byron gone wrong? And I don't even think he's wrong. Like I'm enjoying this. I think it's an enjoyable read. I think he's got some really interesting things here, but there's something like I wonder if in order to get if he really wanted this to be an epic poem, then you need to have some kind of mythic architecture to it. And I don't think a character like Juin, who has his own mythological facets, but he doesn't have he's like a I don't even know what. There's no telos to him. There's no point. There's no end to the quest. It's just a perpetual cycle. Um, and that's the lesson of Don Juan himself is that if you try to embody this character because you are trying to have these sexual conquests, that is not a fulfilling pursuit. That is not a quest that is going to lead you to any sort of real insight about life, about your existence, about um, anything substantial. And the one relationship he has that does feel real is Layla. To your point, like he did have a few friends. He had Heidi, that was substantial and seemed important. Um, Fatherhood, not for him, but for his own, like he's seeking out these father figures, and they've let him down perpetually. And maybe he's trying to redeem that with this character of Layla. So I think it has something to do with the architecture of what is required of a myth, or of an epic poem rather, the mythic architecture of Juin himself not mapping onto an epic poem in terms of mode. Like it's a romance, right? And so the romance is sort of episodic in that it's like Law and Order. It's going to go on for 40 years and there's just going to perpetually be a new episode. Um, there's no end to it.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, I think that is something that he's up to here in all these passages where he's talking about what has become of this great hero, what has become of that great hero. Well, they all died and they're all forgotten, right? And it doesn't matter how great you are,
Right.
like that's going to happen to you too, right? He doesn't have a real high opinion of the power even of poetry to preserve memory beyond death. And and he's seen the other side of this too, the kind of, you know, carpe diem or the pursuit of pleasure, the hedonism in whatever form. He's gone through all that, right? And it's as you're saying, yeah, no, that's not gonna be fulfilling, and he knows that from experience. And so yeah, the question is like, so what do we do in this world? There seems to be a an attempt here to have shown us this kind of progression that leads us to this moment where Juan has the little girl. The little girl is growing up. She's holding fast to her native faith, right? She won't convert to Christianity, and this is like kind of an interesting thing. And she, like him, is in a way like above it all, in that sense. Him socially and her kind of religiously. And so they're an interesting duo. They're obviously of some political importance, and so there might be something with that. But it really seems like there's um, the intrigue here is like, yeah, what is going to happen between them? Because it could go kind of two ways, right? Like either yeah, see, we make her kind of a heroine and she has her own story and she's like a real character, or maybe she becomes a quasi Nabokovian love interest of her guardian, right? Like that seems to be held out as a possibility here too. And so yeah, maybe Juan goes real deep into Juan goes deep into dissipation, right? In the final third of the poem as we have it. I think maybe he really thought he was going to write 100, but I don't think he ever really thought. I think that's just him saying like, this is um, my attempt to outdo, everyone, and I I'm going to do this as long as I can is the sense that I get. And yeah, it turns out to be not all that much longer when he's done with his long prologue.
That's interesting, the parallels and also contrasts with the representation of the integration of a Muslim character, Zoraida, from Don Quixote back into Christian lands, who had herself already converted to Marianist Catholicism.
Mm.
Um, and so I guess TBD, to be determined, how that what form the integration of the Muslim into the Christian lands takes with this character, whether she converts, whether she marries, and it's sort of a successful stewardship, or whether she ends up marrying him and it's more of an incestuous sort of thing. But both of you are making me think that a major difference is, so something I never thought about romance as genre is that it doesn't it have to end in tragedy? Because if it ended in marriage, it would be a comedy. And it's not a comedy. That's the thing about romance. Romance has to end. It has a death by date. It's like an orchid or a plant that you pick for somebody. The romance can't last indefinitely unless you cycle it like Leonardo DiCaprio with his 22 to 25-year-old girlfriend, or Gail Wyman from The Fountainhead, that he must have read some pages from that book and gotten the idea. It's a very objectivist idea to just sort of cycle through women and go through the lust cycle, the passionate love cycle, the social psychologists would call it. Once the second you get close to companionate love, or the first wrinkle on a lady's brow, next, instead of marriage. It is sort of like a Francesca whirlwind and cycling
Mhm.
from the Inferno, right? There's a cycle there too, present, a cyclone, in fact. And so what you're suggesting to me about the difference between the epic mode and the romantic mode is that there's a certain telos in the epic mode that allows one to strive. And it's the striving itself that brings one close to the gods. Because what's missing from this work are the gods if it wants to be epic. There are plenty of references to gods and muses and godlike figures, but they are not present within the narrative of the text itself. And he is not attaining higher levels of consciousness. He seems to be diminishing. And so more like the male anglerfish. Once it is absorbed, its brain is literally absorbed or dissipates once it connects to the female, which is
This
the real horror.
dissipation of Juan when he's with Catherine.
Right. And so I wonder if romance is like that. It becomes a form. This is something the Marquis de Sade also looks into in his major work, The 100 Days of Sodom, as I'm told, though I do own the book. It's not the only Marquis de Sade book I own. I have two of them, which most people probably don't even know he wrote one or two, or the sadism came from. But in any case, the sort of thing that happens is that people who are sexual libertines get sort of bored by sex, because you can only think you're at some point you have to think of all these new things and they're not even fun anymore. Something that was once natively fun that you did not have to be creative with at all then becomes something you have to expend enormous amounts of energy in order to make novel at all. And even then it might not be anywhere close to as fun as the initial bit. Romance would seem to be like that as well. And so the cycle is kind of like a spiral in that it it encompasses less and less experience every time you go around again. And so even though, yes, I understand the argument that, well, one does not have to live an epic existence, there is something about the level of consciousness that one attains in striving towards an ideal, an end, a telos, living with a telos, that I feel like, or I think Don Juan is a good argument for the fact that one only gets close to the gods by striving. One certainly falls away from them by engaging in sort of a cyclical, diminishing, romantic, uh, spiraling, entropic path. Um,
Can I read two passages that I'm thinking about from
please,
this?
please, please.
So one is one that I texted you guys about, Cantos 9, verse 16. To be or not to be, ere I decide, I should be glad to know that which is being. 'Tis true we speculate both far and wide, and deem because we see we are all seeing. For my part, I'll enlist on neither side until I see both sides for once agreeing. For me, I sometimes think that life is death, rather than life a mere affair of breath. Okay, and then 72 in, I'm sorry, Canto 12, verse 72 on page 438, Alex.
Thank you.
But I'm relapsing into metaphysics, that labyrinth whose clue is of the same construction as your cures for hectic physics. I don't know what that word is. Those bright moths fluttering round a dying flame, and this reflection brings me to plain physics, and to the beauties of a foreign dame, compared with those of our pure pearls of price, those polar summers all sun and some ice.
He
I
might
mean,
be very learned there. Physics, phthia is where Achilles is from, and it's etymologically related to a word for death. And so physics might be like a sort of thenotics or
mhm.
thenologics or something like that. But he's funny. But sorry, go on, please.
Well, no, he is funny. I agree. And I like, I think that these two verses are confirming what we just said. Like I think he's basically saying I'm terrified of dying and I'm trying to stay alive as long as possible in this like perpetual motion machine. Uh, and I don't want to now okay, what's interesting, Alex, is you say the difference between an epic and a romance is that a romance ends in tragedy because or it perpetuates one of the two. Like it's going to go and then it's going to stop,
Yeah.
right? And the stopping is going to be tragedy. Like the end of Hamlet is tragedy. Like that's what's going to happen. Now that's a drama, right? Not either romance or epic, but um
But it's actually a tragedy. But like, so Shakespeare writes tragedies, comedies,
history and histories.
romances, and I mean histories too. But yes, also his late romances. So like, how does a romance end? Is sort of my question.
Yeah, yeah,
They're
yeah.
comedies and their overall structure is comedic. I mean, they look like they're going to be tragic in some cases, but then they end up having a happy end.
But don't
There's
they end, but isn't okay, so I guess this would maybe be Alex's question isn't the happy ending just simply that like we're just going to continue this adventure? Like is
But
it like
yeah, well, The Tempest is considered a late romance, for example.
yeah.
And
are we calling the romance are we calling the problem plays romances? Is that the idea?
No,
well,
these
Is
are
it
the late ones.
we could go
They're,
through and really look at them, but
I mean,
like,
I would think of the Tempest as a comedy. It's a reunification. There's marriage at the end. Reunification of Prospero with his country,
but there's
Miranda and
but there's
Ferdinand.
loss too. There's loss of the magic of the island. And so there's a reintegration into society, but at the expense of the romance. The and so that's sort of what I'm wondering. Does romance have to be in transition?
Okay,
But
I guess
but not
I
but not in striving necessarily.
sure. So I think I would make the delineation that a romance is a okay. I shouldn't would make it. I'm asking a question. Is it possible that a romance ends the comedy before the ending? Like it just perpetuate like there's not an actual marriage. It just is going to continue on. Like now we're going to go back off. Like we're going to re-enter the fantasy of Don Quixote. We're not going to end with a marriage. We're not going to end with a death. It's just going to whoop, there we are riding off into the sunset, continuing our adventure. Tune in next week. Like there's no end to the romance.
yeah,
Am I
I mean,
wrong?
I think the
I could be
Shakespeare
wrong.
case is kind of a special case. No, but I think what you're saying makes sense. Like the kinds of romances that Don Quixote read, they're interminable. It doesn't really matter what happens in any given event. Like it's just, a tissue of yeah, fictions and adventures, and then there's the next one, and then there's the next one, and
It's
characters change and come back, and yeah, it just goes on. Yeah.
I guess I,
episodic.
I,
Yeah, no,
I
you're right. There's like a perpetual present, and it's episodic. And like,
yeah,
so, like
yeah,
the
yeah,
knight
yeah.
romances, the chivalric romances are super episodic. This is what Orlando Furioso makes fun of, and this is what Don Quixote also makes fun of. But so there you can see the romanticism in that. You stay in the moment. Like it's very
Yeah,
like our
yeah.
our
Right.
sitcoms, like you're or even The Simpsons, like you're 12 years old for 30 years.
Hmm.
And this is a form of immortality, is staying in the moment, because in the moment you're not dead and therefore you exist. But I so I'm going to make a global point, which might be wrong. I think we have absorbed this sort of romantic, episodic notion as our form of immortality. That if we can stay at
Hmm.
X
Hmm.
or within certain parameters Y, we'll be good. And that's
Yeah.
also kind of bourgeois too, right? If we stay under these
Yeah.
schools and in
Yeah.
these shelters,
Yeah.
we'll be okay. It's not really ethical so much as kind of utilitarian. It's a little of both, but it's something ethics underlie it. But what that's missing that the epic has is the recognition of death and also the recognition that the most vital experience of life, insofar as the experience of being godlike is the most vital experience of life, is something only accessible in recognizing that sometime that your candle is
Off.
burning
Off.
and that you need and that certain situations would seem to require that you burn quite a bit of it all at once, and that maybe irrespective of your plan to stay alive as long as possible, which is great in bourgeois sort of romantic conditions when life is great, life will end, and maybe striving allows one to get to the best place one can get within the limitations of being mortal. And rather than just slowly fading out, which the romantics seem to not want to do, but do de facto, um,
Off.
unless they sort of go the opposite direction, with and just end it.
Do, off.
The epics, right? Like the epic ethos in Telos seems to be, well, since I'm going to die and perhaps young, I need to strive for something powerful, and in so far doing that, I can be close to the gods and live. And the best thing I can do is live sort of uh, uh, an existence parallel to the divine, or experiencing the divine as I do what will inevitably bring me to my death.
Uh, I have two thoughts. One is uh, popular music, and the other is contemporary dialogue about tech CEOs in Silicon Valley.
Yes, I know this guy. I know him.
Um, you know the Neil Young song My Hey Hey, Out of the Blue into the Black, right? Better to burn out than it is to rust. It's a
Uh,
great song, but he's got two versions of it. One is like a kind of like distorted guitar, and it's the romantic ethos, right? It's let me die before I get old kind of mentality. The other one is an acoustic version, which is also good. And then the other point is this is the you're pointing out the ethos of the Silicon Valley tech CEO who uses a blood boy and is trying to extend his life forever because he's met these idyllic requirements and he doesn't ever want it to end.
right,
They're trapped in the romance, and what's the tragedy of them is that they're not using any of this amassed wealth to actually further humankind. They say that they're doing that, but what that would actually require is sacrifice from themselves. And
right.
that's
Migrate
what an epic
outward,
is about.
working really hard to solve some problem rather than making one healthier. Like,
Correct.
it's the ultimate narcissism, right?
Yeah,
It,
yeah, 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 yeah.
but I'm not blaming them, but I am identifying it, I think, accurately. Um, but Wes, I saw you nodding before I made that strong statement.
No, sorry, I was just looking at where we end up here. To your question about the prologue and the structure of this, like
Hmm.
he he does seem to really, uh, I mean, I think being making a joke um, about the cantos that we can expect coming up. Uh, he said his best one, except one about astronomy, is going to be about political economy. So yeah, yeah, the wealth of nations and this and that, right? So I mean, yeah, I'd love to read a long comic comedic romance or whatever you want to call it about the Silicon Valley of that day. That'd be cool.
Well, have you seen the show Silicon Valley?
All right.
It's
Well, maybe
pretty on spot
as
on.
per our conversation prior to this, it would be Claude
Yeah.
AI rather than ChatGPT that will do. But maybe in the last second or so, Wes, you could say a little bit about your progress, if progress there be on the
Hmm.
Cambridge project, which Babcock was not as sold on last time, but I know you're eager to move forward on. Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't written any more about it. I do think about it. It's kind of on the back burner. And I don't know. I think I have to get a little bit more of a structure according to the suggestions that the editor has put out there. He has like a whole essay of his own about like how to write an essay for a popular audience. And so I need to look at that more closely and kind of make mine a little bit programmatic in that way, at least to not offend some of his sensibilities, assuming they haven't changed since that essay was published. But yeah, basically, I just want to talk about, this kind of experience of being in high school and looking around and seeing like, well, there's lots of ways of understanding the world and that are sort of conventional, right? That have to do with materialism, that have to do with self-interest, and that can take lots of interesting forms, of course. But basically, there is this other thing, right? There is this other tradition that is buried in the language in a way, and if you study it at school at all, it's pretty shocking, it's pretty surprising, and it peeks through in a work like Proof Rock, and that it's kind of a comedic poem about this juxtaposition of the ancient, the tradition, the myth in modern, bourgeois society or something like that. That's one way to read the poem. And um, so yeah, so I just kind of want to think about that, look at that, and write a short thing about that that I think um, high school age kids could kind of grab onto and maybe resonate with. Not sure if that'll pan out. It, I don't intend to spend a super long time on it, and I have the luxury of sort of doing this stuff as a hobby, really, because I've got this other job that uh, now that I'm back at it, it's not going to leave me a ton of time to do in-depth research into Eliot's whole theory of art and all this and that. So it'll have to be a little bit
Oh,
later,
Well,
a
I think
lighter piece.
there's a
Yeah.
1,500 word limit, so I don't know how much you'd be able to get
Yeah.
all of that in there, though. That I'm sure that would inform your
hey,
work really well. Well, all that said, should we talked a little bit in the text about finishing this after this. We have what, five more cantos, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, counting ordinally rather than just numerically. And yeah, okay. It's a little bit of reading, but each one is itself not particularly long. And
how much did we read last time?
let's see, 9 to 12. I'm looking at that again too.
I got it here right now.
It
Nine. We did nine. So this is 20 extra pages. I mean, I did it quite quickly, so I could be ready for a week from today for sure to finish.
okay. Well, that's helpful because I think Wes and I are hitting the Side Quest podcast on Thursday with our friend Otto. If we can get the time right. But he's pretty flexible on that day, so if it works for us, it'll work. Okay, good. Well, then we will be finishing this work next time, and then on to the next thing. And we had a couple major options. I know Tristram Shandy is the one that was carrying the day so far. I'm pretty into reading that with you gentlemen, just because it can be sort of Pynchon-esque to me reading that, but I need Wes to tell me that it's really good. And so now we're going to be, so, we were all trying it with Pynchon. You love Nabokov, Babcock, but I know Wes really likes Tristram Shandy. And so our roles are all reversing over time, as it were. So this is one that I'm like, okay, I hope I can like it. But I really do hope I can like it. And so is that Lucy?
This is Charlie.
Oh, that's Charlie.
This
Ah,
is my parents' dog. She's a little more rambunctious. Lucy is not as spry.
yes. All right. Well, gentlemen, it's wonderful to see you. Wonderful to talk,
Oh.
Don Juan. Hopefully, Babcock, you find some time to talk to the maybe AI bot, maybe real
Yeah,
educator on
yeah,
our
I need to
product.
get some one-on-one for how I can improve my score.
Yeah. Are you real? And it's like,
Oh, and then our fan. Yes, I'll
yeah,
find that part out.
our
I'll
fan,
investigate that.
our fan is very articulate and seems to understand the work, maybe better than us, better than we do. But with our help, and so that's a labyrinthine author. So I'm happy to have helped one person, if that is a person, and at the very least, we helped an LLM. Um, well, gentlemen, see you in this doubtful world soon.
Okay, goodbye.